Hey guys, I am currently developing a liminal space horror game. Now, before we go into my current game, I'm going to talk about some previous projects I had started and canceled during college, because my current game is basically an evolution of some of those concepts. And I also think it's important to provide some context based on some overscoping mistakes I had made when I was pretty new, and how I'm currently managing that scope. Now, whenever someone is brand new to game development, usually we get this idea of some unrealistic game that can't actually be made, but we have this cool idea. For me, that was an alternate universe game where you would explore procedurally generated universes. This procedural generation that I had in mind was basically No Man's Sky, but way more advanced. Because I was imagining like procedurally generating the environment, the architecture, the creatures, as well as like the overall technology level and the clothing. It was honestly pretty ridiculous. This was brand new, and I was basically just learning Unreal Engine. And while I was learning it, I kind of quickly realized that this was not going to happen. However, some of the concepts that did carry over to my current game was some of the world building I had come up with and an initial story premise. So the idea was that it would start off with you on vacation with your little sister, staying in this cabin out in the middle of nowhere, and then all of a sudden at night, little sister gets teleported to an alternate universe, and that begins your journey of going through different universes to try and save her. In 2020, I had started watching a bunch of YouTube videos about liminal spaces and then those unnerving images with unnerving music compilations. So the reason I liked it was because I really enjoyed how uncanny the environments were. And I liked how in the unnerving images videos, it would generally show a location that was during the day, but then this monster out. It kind of gave an impression where you couldn't really know if the monster was aggressive or not. So I really liked that and the overall aesthetic of those videos. That's basically the main aesthetic that's in my current project. And it was the aesthetic I was going for in my second project. Now, for a college assignment, we basically had to make this decently polished level. We didn't have too much time for it, so it's not like it could have really been that great anyway. But yeah, for that level, I seriously overscoped. The premise for that level was that you would basically be starting off in a house, and then you would go to sleep, and then you'd wake up in the middle of the night with a monster in the building, and then you'd have to try to get to your friends to wake them up, and then they would leave. So the gameplay was going to be basically you hiding in the dark with a monster stalking you. Then you would throw different objects, and that would create noise that the monster would go to, because it would be dark enough to where you couldn't really see the monster and the monster couldn't really see you, so it was a lot of like audio things. At least that's what the plan was. My main mistake was, I kid you not, looking for wall textures because I wanted the level to look nice. And I spent way too much time on that over any of the actual gameplay. I had previously done a little bit of the AI in a different project, but I didn't even get started on the AI in this project. All the AI did was just stand there, menacingly. So what I really liked about this one was actually kind of an unintended mistake. When I was initially designing the level layout, I realized it didn't actually look like a house. I had basically just designed a level that would be a neat path for the monster to try to find you. When I realized it didn't look like a house, I then also found out that it could actually work. Because the story idea was that you would be in a dream-like world, I decided that the initial starting spot would be a regular looking house. When you wake up, then it's uncanny. I had you go to bed, and then you'd wake up in the same bedroom, but then as soon as you left the door, the environment was going to be very different. And that particular opening is something I'm definitely going to be doing in my current project, because I really liked that. I mean, I'm not sure if I'll actually throw that in the beginning of my game, but stuff like that is what I'll be doing in my current project. Now, there were obviously other college assignments that I had done, but I'm not going to go over that because they're not really relevant for this. But there was one in particular where it was a group project that 3 of us were doing, and it was over the course of 6 months, actually. It was really fun to do. However, we definitely overscoped that one. The idea was to have 5 levels. We only ended up doing 1 level, and it still needed some polish. So that one, we were basically doing all of the code from scratch. I mean, we were watching some tutorials and stuff. It ended up being really simple and honestly kind of a bad game. So this kind of taught me a lot about overscoping and just what I could realistically achieve. Alright, so now we get to my current project, which technically started off as my senior project. So in order to reduce the scope, I decided to just cut my ego and use an RPG template. It was actually one of the free for the month templates. The initial story idea was that this would be another multiverse game. I still wanted to do that concept. And it would be a survival horror game where you fight enemies. Now, initially, I was actually against the idea of combat in survival horror games. What changed my mind is playing Silent Hill 3, where unlike the other Silent Hill games, in this one, you can't actually fight every single enemy. You can fight some. However, it takes up a lot of ammo just to kill a weak enemy, and then you don't actually have enough ammo to fight every single enemy you see. So it really forces you to run around. And what I could do is I could just make it so that you're forced to run from every enemy you see. But I really liked how you could fight some enemies, because then after playing some other horror games where you can only run from the monster, I think it's better when it does have combat. What I knew right away about this project was that I wanted it to be very story heavy. What I did before the semester for the senior project even started, I was messing with adding branching quests. Now, what this involved is using the quest NPCs in the RPG template, and then I was just messing with the code to make them branching. I wasn't really using clean code here. It was really messy. I was just basically seeing how the quest system in it was set up. Now, ultimately, I ended up scratching this system completely, but it wasn't that worthless because I did need to know how the quest system worked in order to implement what I currently have for it. Now, for the actual assignment, I was going to start off with a bit of a dream sequence where you would find out some of the character's backstory. I mean, not that much, but just enough to get you hooked. And then the main level would take place in a combination of a grocery store and furniture room. The idea was that you would start off in a grocery store, you would go upstairs, and then find this section that looked a little weird for what a grocery store would have, and then you would get knocked out, wake up, and then in this crazy new liminal space area, and then that's where the monsters would be. In 2021, Epic Games launched a realistic character creator for use in Unreal Engine called Metahumans. I made a metahuman character for the protagonist and actually had the colors on the clothing be symbolic. So the initial idea for the backstory was that the protagonist was abducted by aliens and then injected with this chemical that would allow her to teleport dimensions, and then years later is when the actual game takes place. The purple represented a portal, and then the little green skull kind of looked like an alien head, and that basically just represented the alien abduction backstory. And then I added a peaceful mob to the game, which I just called the Floater. What I wanted to do for this is I wanted it to be peaceful, and it was supposed to recreate the vibes in those unnerving images videos where you wouldn't necessarily know if the monster was aggressive or not. Because what I liked about those images was that the location seemed somewhat safe. And then there was this creature, which would then give a sort of uncanny valley feel. I then added this TV monster to the game, and the idea for this was that it was supposed to be a similar difficulty to the closer enemy in Silent Hill 3. I wanted it to kick the player and then launch them backwards to show basically how strong it was. You were basically supposed to run from this enemy for the most part. You could technically fight it, but it would be very difficult to fight. Because the TV monster had different proportions to a regular human, I needed to create my own animations. So I set up this control rig for it. I've seen some control rigs where they generally have color-coded where blue is on the left side or red is on the right side or any combination like that. I instead made my control rig based on so that you zoomed out, you could easily see which body part the controls were meant for. Now, at some point in time, I don't necessarily remember when this was, I had seen a Reddit post where someone made their assets available for free. And one of those assets was a dialogue system that had automatic cutscenes. I decided I was going to integrate this. However, during the senior project, I thought integrating this asset would be a bit over scope for the amount of time I had. So I decided not to do it, and you'll see later on why that was a good decision. I then used the control rig to make a kicking animation for the TV monster. The way I did this was I basically edited the idle animation where I just took out all of the keyframes except for the first and last one, so that when the monster is just standing there, it'll automatically do the kicking animation and then go back to its idle animation, and just ended up looking fairly smooth. This animation wasn't super polished. I only spent like 1 hour max on it because I was just trying to get something out there. And then I made the actual mechanics for launching the player into the air. Initially, I ended up with a bug where I kind of screwed up the physics, ended up launching the player in like specific coordinate directions rather than based on the offset of the TV monster. I eventually did fix this though. I then wasted way too much time with animation retargeting. I was trying to retarget Mixamo animations to the Unreal Mannequin, and I kind of screwed up the metahuman animations like just in general. It wasn't set up very well. I then started building the first section of what the level would be like when you initially wake up before you get to the main spot with the monsters. I made this kind of maze area. It didn't look super polished, but it was basically the general layout of the path. I had run into issues with the camera bouncing off the walls. It was mostly for the doors and like the walls. So I then went through and increased the size of the hallways so that the camera wouldn't be bouncing off that much. And then I also added the ending section of the level. I was then once again wasting way too much time trying to get the animation retargeting right and spending less time on the actual gameplay. So the actual senior project wasn't going very well because I was just wasting too much time on trying to make it look nice. At the very last minute, I added the TV monsters into that level, into that hallway section, even though they weren't really supposed to be there. It was just more for testing to see how the TV monster would be like in actual gameplay. And then I started working on audio for it. The idea for the TV monster audio was that it would constantly be playing a distorted radio broadcast where you would kind of hear someone talking, but it would be distorted enough to where you couldn't really tell. And then at this point in time, I had just thrown that in at the last minute to have something to show because I was wasting too much time on other stuff. At this point in time, it was really buggy. However, I then later fixed the audio where before I had basically been playing the audio based on where the TV monster was at that point in time, but then as it would move around, the audio would stay in the same place. And then I fixed this by just adding an audio component to the monster, and then that's how I had the audio working. I might not use these exact sound effects, but this is pretty much how I actually envisioned the monster sounding.
No, han ayudado.
That was basically as far as the senior project went. And yeah, it wasn't that great. I really wish I had done more with that and not wasted too much time on the animation retargeting. At some point after I graduated, I decided to pivot this game to a Backrooms game. Before we go into the details of that pivot and what the new focus of the game is, I'm just going to go over a bit of an explanation of what the Backrooms is. So the Backrooms technically started off as this office building built in the 1960s. At one point in time, it was renovated, and while it was renovating, a picture was taken of it that looked kind of eerie. In 2019, someone used that picture and basically made up a story about teleporting into an infinite maze, and this is what kind of started this concept. And then there's been various different adaptations, or more like interpretations. Backrooms is basically this modern urban legend where there's different versions of the concept. So in 2019 and 2020, various wikis were created based on some kind of role-playing people were doing under Reddit about the Backrooms. And these wikis added different levels to it, which were basically different areas based on different liminal space photos. Now, the Wikidot and Fandom are the two main wikis that people use. Both those wikis are licensed under CC BY-SA, so they kind of do share a lot of the same lore initially. They've got some of the same organizations and same monsters. And then the first 13 levels are very similar. I mean, there are some lore differences between them, but they're generally based on the same images. However, after that, they split off into their own things where different numbered levels have completely different appearances and completely different lores. There's also been a lot of video game adaptations on Steam that kind of just use their own lore for this. There's been lots of YouTube series, but the most popular one was done by Kane Pixels in 2022. His lore was the Backrooms being opened up by scientists. It did not use any of the level system that the wikis had, and it had its own monster. As far as I'm aware, it only has one monster in the series. At some point in time, A24 started working with Kane Pixels, and there is actually an upcoming movie being developed, I'm assuming based on that YouTube series. In October of 2024, American Horror Stories released an episode based on the Backrooms. This essentially was treated as kind of a purgatory system. It had the similar yellow rooms, although it had green lighting instead of typical yellow lighting, and then it had this grocery store section. The lore for that was basically treating it as a purgatory place that the protagonist was phasing in and out of. So with all these different adaptations, I mean, my game will be using its own lore. It'll be the most similar to the wikis in that it'll have a level system and some monsters. However, it's not going to copy any of the levels from those wikis. And the overall lore is based on the world building I had come up with for those previous projects. The main reason for the pivot was that, first of all, it was basically the same type of story I was already going to do. Instead of just different universes, it would be different Backrooms levels. They would both be using liminal spaces anyway, so it's not like I was really pivoting the project. I was mostly just pivoting the story. The primary reason I decided to do this was that the words Backrooms and liminal will be things that people will search for on Steam, so that'll just kind of help with marketing. I also have a familiarity with the Backrooms and liminal space audience. I am technically part of that audience, so I have a clear idea of what the audience would expect from something like this. Some Backrooms forums actually do allow self-promotion, so it'll make my marketing situation a bit easier. And then another reason I decided to pivot was because I was looking at the competition on Steam. Almost all Backrooms and liminal space games on Steam follow a similar formula where it's a first-person perspective game, usually using a VHS filter, not always. And then the gameplay ends up being either just walking around looking at environments, or you'll be occasionally running from a monster. I mean, not all games are like this, but the vast majority are. Now, this isn't necessarily a bad thing. However, when you continue to scroll on Steam and see like almost every game that follows this formula, they do start to blend in, whereas my project is going to be a story-driven game in third-person view where you actually do fight monsters. So on the Steam page, it would just kind of stick out. Basically, this will just be easier for me to compete and to market. Remember that dialogue asset that I had considered using for the senior project? Because I had graduated, I decided that I would have enough time to actually try to implement this asset into the game. So what I did was I made a brand new project file using the same RPG template and the dialogue asset. And the reason I made a new project file was because I assumed that adding in this dialogue asset would completely break the game. And it also worked out because there had been updates to the RPG asset that weren't there before. After following the tutorial for the dialogue asset on how to integrate it into your current project, initially these two assets were incompatible, which you could have probably expected by now. When you clicked on an NPC to start the cutscene, instead of the actual cutscene started, it would just display the dialogue text. And I found out that the reason for this was because the dialogue asset uses an ID system for all of its actors, and then there were conflicts with the way the RPG template was spawning the player. It has child classes based on your combat class and then the character race and gender. However, when the player is actually spawned, it creates a new subclass on runtime. I wasn't really able to figure out how the RPG template was spawning the player, but this was basically the issue. The dialogue asset adds a new random ID if there's more than one actor with the same ID, in which case it was reading like two different actors as the player, even though there's only one player. So the way I fixed this was I disabled the dialogue asset from assigning random IDs if there were duplicates. Now, what this meant was that I would need to make sure that there was only one ID per dialogue actor in the level, which is what I would have to do already, so it felt like it wasn't that bad of an issue. One of the best things about the dialogue asset was that it has an events and conditions system. You set up a dialogue in a data table, and then you can add in infinite amounts of events and conditions. The events and conditions read different variables that you can assign values in the data table, and then you can just have the events and conditions do whatever you want. I then basically edited the RPG template, recreating some functions that were just slightly different so that it would be usable for me. And essentially what I have now is one event and one condition for changing the dialogue or making choices appear based on the current quest progress. And all I need to do is just assign IDs when setting it up in the data table. So it's super easy. I did run into an issue with the talk to objective specifically, but then that ended up just being more because I didn't understand how the talk to objective was set up in the RPG template. In comparison, this is what my dialogue system looked like in a past project. So for starters, here is how the dialogue system in the RPG asset is by default. So as you can see here, it's just like a text box. Then you would click this to accept it, click this to deny it. These are NPCs I made that when you click on them, they trigger a separate dialogue asset. I'll show you what it's like. So yeah, as you can see, it actually starts a cutscene. We've got dialogue options. I technically just recreated the dialogue for the demo quests for the RPG asset. So click this, it accepts it. Wait, what the heck did I click? What's great about this one is you don't have to manually set up the camera angles. It just kind of does this automatically. Oh, I clicked the wrong one. Wrong dialogue option. So, okay. Here's the one that accepts it. I'll still need to kind of fix one thing where it's kind of switching the camera angle, even if it's the same character talking. So I'll have to switch that. So now I'll click I'll take the job. And so now what this does is when you select this dialogue option, at the end of the final dialogue line, it actually runs an event, which then accepts the quest. What I basically did was I tried to integrate the RPG system's quest system into the dialogue asset. So this NPC right here, he actually checks to see if we have an objective to talk to him. Right now we don't, so this is just the default text I set up to run. This guy right here, I wanted to make sure that there is a failsafe. So if we abandon the quest, so now this quest is no longer available. So when you click on him now, it just runs it through the start. Then I just redo this. It accepts the quest. I just wanted to make sure that because you never know when a player might just abandon the quest. However, I also set up a way to select a dialogue option that actually abandons the quest. And the reason I did that was because it just opens up the option to have branching quests where you can, let's say, do something and then it fails a side quest. I'm not sure I'll actually use that. So then we click on this guy. He asks if we defeated him. That dialogue line that ran, it checks to see if we've accepted the quest or not. Remember how earlier it just ran from the start again because I abandoned it? That was because we hadn't accepted the quest now, but because we do have it accepted, it runs this. And so now we get to this dialogue line. So this one right here, this bottom option, by default, it's locked. It's actually checking to see if we've completed all the objectives for it. And because we haven't currently, it's locked right now. This one's just always available. It's just saying, no, I didn't do this quest yet. So now I'm just going to go speed run this quest real quick. So we're going to go back over here. Okay, so now when I click on it, I've actually completed all the objectives to it. So then I can click yes, I did. And so then after this one, it'll run an event which completes the quest. So then right here it's under completed quests. When I talk to this guy again, it's setting up a new quest. This is checking to see if the quest has been completed, and so because it has, it's running this new dialogue. And so this is for a quest to do a talk to objective. So now I click on him. It's checking to see if we have a talk to objective for a specific quest that hasn't been fulfilled. By default, the RPG system, its quest system didn't actually have a way to check for a specific talk to objective, like for a specific quest. It only checked if you had any quest open to talk to a certain NPC. So then I kind of modified it so I can now check to see if there's a specific quest that has that objective. And the reason is because there might be multiple quests that have you talk to the same NPC, and I want it actually completing the right objective and displaying the right text for each quest. So okay, so now that one, there's no longer any open objective to talk to him. So when I run it again, it just does the default dialogue because there's no objective to talk to him because I already completed that. And so now when I talk to this guy, it's now checking again to see if I've completed it. And because I have, I can select yes. And so that completes the quest. Now, you might be thinking, oh, that's cool. You finished the dialogue system. Yeah, I thought that as well. Unfortunately, I did not. And it was coming to this realization that ended up delaying the project way longer than it should have. I kind of lost a lot of motivation here because a lot of what I was doing was just fixing code and making improvements, which meant that there was no real visual change. And I had been working on this dialogue system for so long, as well as working a full-time job. So I unfortunately did not work on this as much as I really should have. At this point in time, Unreal Engine 5.4 had released, and the RPG template had updated it to 5.4. So I was going to kind of just port over what I had done for that integration and clean up the code a bit. This was actually really nice because the RPG template had updated and fixed a separate bug that was occurring. What I did to port this was, instead of copying files, I was essentially just recreating everything I had done, except I was using cleaner code, and I started adding in better comments as well as error messages to help with debugging for future bugs. There were some problems with the current setup that I needed to change. Every dialogue NPC required writing initial code, and it was using this make array system to list all of the actors that would appear in a cutscene. I really don't like make array. I think instead you should just actually have an array listed there. And this also caused problems because it restricted the character to only appear in cutscenes with those specific characters. So for example, if in one cutscene character A was supposed to appear with character B, you would set that up using make array. However, if you wanted another cutscene where character A appeared with character C, you would have to create a separate dialogue actor in order to do that. And it was because it was using this make array system. To go about fixing this, I first was making major changes to the dialogue NPC. For the dialogue NPC, I was actually using a child class of the RPG templates AI. So I could have it turn aggressive or be a helpful AI depending on the story. So now with the current system, I don't need to write any starting code, and it automatically starts a cutscene if just the player and the NPC are in it. The only thing I need to do to set it up is just create a new child class and then assign the NPC's ID. So good news, this dialogue system is finally finished, where it's not only integrated into the RPG template, it has also been improved for a long-term project where there's no sloppy code on setting everything up. So now I can set up different quests and cutscenes pretty easily. Now, what really got me through this motivation slump was looking back and seeing how much progress I had actually made, as well as realizing that I was using an RPG template asset. I wouldn't need to make every single mechanic from scratch. There were a lot of mechanics that this dialogue asset was just doing the heavy lifting for. It just made it feel like that once I got through this slump, I would then be able to work on my actual game. If I had been creating everything from scratch, I would have definitely reconsidered the scope of my project. While I was working on the dialogue system, some life circumstances had made it so I wasn't able to access my computer during the weekends. Ironically, this actually made me get more productive because I realized I didn't have as much free time access to my computer as I should have, and I realized at the rate I was going, I was never going to finish this. It actually added some motivation where when I was able to use my computer, I would actually get to work instead of just wasting time on other stuff. So while I didn't have access to my computer, I focused on what I could just do with my phone, which was mostly just Google Docs. So I made a lot of changes to the game design doc I had started a while back, and I wrote down everything that I had come up with since in my head for a bunch of different mechanics and just put it down on paper and reorganized it. The purpose of this was for better organization for myself, and in case I added other people to the project, they could just read the design doc and instantly know what the project was about without things being stuck in my head. Unreal Engine 5.7 had released, And I considered updating to that because Unreal 5.7 has the metahuman system integrated into the engine, whereas older versions, you have to use this website to make your characters. However, I decided against this because in 5.7, the in-engine metahuman creator was extremely laggy for me and I really couldn't use it. It also only had a t-shirt for the clothing, whereas on the website, there were a lot of other clothing options. I decided to just stick with Unreal 5.4. Now, jump scare warning. This entire time, I had not been using source control. Yeah, also at one point in time, I couldn't even open up my project because of a corrupted animation file. I was able to fix it by deleting the animation file, but yeah, I definitely needed source control. So after finishing the cutscene system, I finally set up source control and am currently using diversion. Right now, the idea is for the armor system, and this is because the RPG template actually has an armor system. I was going to just use the different metahuman clothing options you can get from the website. For this, I basically created an underwear version of the metahuman. Now, you're not actually going to spawn in your underwear. This is not one of those types of games. This is basically just when you unequip all the armor. I then integrated the metahuman into my project the more proper way, where instead of just copying and pasting a lot of the metahuman code, I was basically just going through, recreating it, and then making some slight tweaks in order to make it work for the RPG template character. I then found out that Unreal Engine 5.4 had an update to the animation retargeting system. So remember how I mentioned multiple times in the senior project how I was wasting all of my time with the animation retargeting? Now you can retarget from metahuman, the mannequin, and Mixamo in just a few seconds. Whereas before, I was spending hours trying to get those fingers lined up, and it wasn't working before, but now I can do it in just a few seconds. So yeah, that was a very pleasant surprise. I then ran into an issue with the metahuman where it looked like she was going bald, and I was able to fix this by just increasing the thickness for the hair strands. The LOD sync was automatically on for the metahuman, and what this basically does is the further away the camera is from the metahuman, it lowers the LOD. And this is for performance. If you have a lot of metahumans, you don't want them using the highest LOD. However, for the actual player character, you don't want this LOD syncing on because it meant that moving the camera around when playing was changing the LOD. So I just forced it to use the second highest LOD setting for the player character. The reason I didn't use the highest LOD setting was because the second highest looked visually pretty much the same, and I figured it would be a little bit better for performance. I then made this asset dump project where I imported the original metahuman, and then I migrated the clothing and materials over to my current project. And the reason I had to make a duplicate metahuman anyway is because if you make a metahuman with clothing on, the body actually is partly invisible, and that's because of the clothing. I wanted the full body showing for like the underwear version, and then I'm just going to be using the meshes for the clothing as like the different armor pieces. You'll automatically spawn with armor on. And then tested it out to see if it works. It actually does. Another good thing is that I thought this would be a major hassle where I would have to make a ton of different duplicate metahumans for different color variations of the clothing. However, I saw that you can just change the colors in the material editor, so that'll be a huge time saver. So that is where we are currently with the project. I am honestly super excited because I finished this major hurdle I was going through with the cutscene system. I'm really excited because a lot of Backrooms games don't have stories, and I'll finally be able to make one with a good story and with a good cutscene system to go along with that story instead of just a bad text box. I'm also excited because it wasn't super hard to set up that TV monster, so I can just kind of do it again. But the next steps for this project are to port the TV monster, add in a generic monster that's like a more normal difficulty level with just a regular attack, as well as add in the different combat mechanics, as well as non-combat mechanics in order to avoid the monster. I had come up with some design ideas for how you avoid the monster. However, I won't really be going into detail about it in this video because I haven't made that yet. And I want to kind of surprise you all once I actually have that ready. So thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next update. Bye!